Guys, welcome to the J. Scott Outdoors podcast. I'm looking forward to the next couple of months and getting back into the swing of things with this podcast. I want to thank you guys, the listeners, for all of the support that you've given my podcast over the years. It's hard to believe that I started this in February of 2015. It's been a great journey, and I look forward to getting more information to you guys. I want to thank the sponsors of this podcast. I want to thank GoHunt.com and remind you guys that the Black Friday sale actually is starting early on November 12th. There's tons of great gear that's 60% off at the Go Hunt Gear Shop. Go to GoHunt.com. Also, remember, with this Black Friday sale, when you sign up for Insider, you're going to get $100 off to spend at the Go Hunt Gear Shop. That's just when you sign up for Insider. If you want the Explorer, you get $50 to spend in the Go Hunt Gear Shop. Go to GoHunt.com. Use the J. Scott promo code. Guys, I want to thank Go Hunt for their sponsorship. I want to thank you guys for supporting Go Hunt. They've been a loyal supporter of mine from the beginning, so go check them out. I also want to thank Kuiu.com. Kuiu is the ultralight hunting gear that I've been wearing since 2010. Great ultralight hunting gear. They've got 3 camo patterns from the Velo to the Verde to the Vias. They've got packs. They've got all sorts of great lightweight gear. Go to Kuiu.com to order. It's a direct-to-consumer website. You can go to Kuiu.com to order the gear there. I also want to thank Phonescope.com. Use the JScott23 promo code for a 10% discount. Phonescope is the digiscoping device that I use on my iPhone to capture some of the videos and photos that you see on my Instagram account. And then I'd also like to thank Lathrop & Sons and remind you that they're doing a Mountain Hunter boot giveaway and a custom Synergy footbed giveaway. All you have to do to enter is go to lathropsons.com, click on the link there to enter into the giveaway, and you can be entered into that drawing. Give James and Steven a call if you want to discuss and talk to them about their 3 boots. They basically have the Encompass, the Mountain Hunter, and the Elite boot, plus their custom Synergy footbeds. I've been wearing them now for over a year and just absolutely love their boots. There's 2 ways to get hold of them: boots at lathropsons.com, or you can call them directly. Call James, call Steven directly. They're 2 brothers. 618-544-8782. Guys, let's get right to these episodes. If you'd like to send me a message, you can go to my Instagram account, which is at jscottoutdoors. You can send me an email, jscottoutdoors@gmail.com. God bless, and thanks for your support.
All right, we are joined today by J. Scott from J. Scott Outdoors. Thanks for taking your time this morning. It's November. Hard to pin people down in November, but you were able to jump on right away. So thank you so much for being available and wanting to chat mule deer with me this morning.
You bet. I'm looking forward to it. Excited to be here. And yeah, it's November. It's a month we all look forward to. And I get to watch those deer rut around. And, you know, I'm fortunate down here in the Southwest. We also do mule deer down in Mexico, and our deer don't rut down there till January. So kind of the best of both worlds. You get to kind of chase the rut a little bit, do the same thing with turkeys a little bit down there in Mexico with the Gould's turkeys as well. So, yeah, I look forward to chatting with you today for sure.
Yeah, that's the bummer up here is even our neighboring state, Nebraska, it's the exact same hunting season as South Dakota, pretty much, for 2 weeks in November. So you got to pick and choose, and even going over to Colorado, it's the same kind of Wyoming, same Montana. Yeah, there's too many hunts to do and not enough time to do it in. And every once in a while, I want to chase a whitetail as well. So it's tough to narrow down those hunting options, but haven't made it down your way yet. I've had a couple hunts planned, and just life happens and decide it's not the best thing to do. But someday I'll get down there and hunt Arizona. And
absolutely.
Yeah. I don't know if New Mexico or Mexico's on the list. That'd be cool. But that's another game. But if you wouldn't mind, introduce yourself. I know J. Scott Outdoors, you've got podcast, outfitting, and folks like yourself always have hands in multiple things. Yeah, just what do you all have going on?
Yeah, so I'm Jay Scott of Jay Scott Outdoors. I've got a hunting and fishing podcast. I started back in 2015, and hard to believe it's pushing almost 10 years now. And had a successful podcast and run a outfitting business in Arizona. I was a guide for mainly elk and bighorn sheep here in Arizona for about 20 years, and then in 17 I transitioned to a hunt manager at the Ot 6 Ranch, a mule deer and elk ranch in Colorado. 50,000 acre ranch, the Ot 6, beautiful place. I was there for 5 years, and then I've bounced around some of the best ranches all over the West, chasing elk and mule deer and, following my passions. I run an outfitting business in Mexico. This will be my 28th season doing Coues deer, mule deer, and Gould's turkey down in Sonora and Chihuahua, Mexico. So this January's, I can't believe it, but it's 28 seasons starting this January, and so we're really looking forward to that. And yeah, I just have social media pages on my Instagram page, J Scott Outdoors. Just try and help people be better at hunting and fishing, and try and provide a place where people can learn and people can share and comment without worrying about saying something that someone that's more experienced might think is a stupid question. I try and be an educational platform, try and inform people and just help people become better at what they do. So that's what I try and do on a daily basis. I also have a real estate, my real job. I have a real estate business. I buy and sell real estate. I've been doing that since 1997. I'm based primarily here out of Arizona. I live in Paradise Valley, Arizona, and buy and sell real estate. That's what I call my real job, but stay pretty busy, travel around quite a bit. My wife and I are always on the move, and it's nice with my podcast and with what I do with my outfitting business. I can pretty much be anywhere where I've got Wi-Fi and my phone, and conduct business. So that's a short synopsis there of what I get to do. But yeah, I'm looking forward to our discussion this morning.
Yeah, the real estate piece that's new to me. I didn't know that was the real job.
Yeah, that's
Many of
my
us have.
primary source of income, and
Yeah,
been doing it a long time. It's really, I turned 50 last February, and it's I wake up every day and can't believe I'm 50, but I also can't believe I've been in real estate since 1997. And
sure.
but it's been a great thing for me, because it's allowed me a lot of freedom, and it's allowed me to do a lot of the things that I like to do. And so yeah.
Awesome. So Jay had the idea of doing a podcast. It probably was subliminal through seeing maybe some of your posts, because I was looking back. Oh, the dates on this were before I had emailed you, so they must have been as I was scrolling. Just that idea must have hit me on just some field judging for mule deer, and I know you've taken quite a few beautiful specimens in the elk world. I saw some of your two over 400-inch, well over 400-inch bulls. Holy smokes, those are impressive. That 406, I believe, the one that's just got that 8 points. He's got everything. He's got the huge whale tails. He's got the little devil point. I saw at least one on there, and just huge tines. And to find a bull like that's just gorgeous. And I know that must be an Arizona bull, maybe, but
Yeah, most of the big bulls are from Arizona. We're real blessed out here in Arizona. For a long time, our game and fish really limited the tags and the quality of elk, and it's still really good. It's just hard. It's not as good as it was, I would say, 20 years ago, 15, 20 years ago. But it's still really good. And, we've been blessed with a state that really wants to manage for, older age class animals, and with the mule deer, with the elk, our coos, antelope, it's been a real trophy rich state in for older age class animals. And so been fortunate to be kind of right here in the hub of the epicenter of big bulls and big mule deer and big trophy animals. So that's been fun for sure.
Yeah. And I've got a mule deer tag in my pocket. And so that was kind of another thing that struck the excitement to figure out some of these field judging things. And I've never really shot a stud mule deer. I've topped out at that 161. And South Dakota is not known for huge deer. To find something big, you got to look for it. They're here, primarily on private, like a lot of places. But to find a big, beautiful mule deer, it takes some work. And had some of those opportunities in some places where I know they hold some of those bigger deer. But once you get in that 160 to 180, there's some things there that you can get fooled really easily, or in that 180 to 200, you get really confused, and you can walk up and have ground shrinkage or growage or whatever things. They aren't what they seem. It's unless you got the trained eye. So I want to just figure out some of these field judging tactics, and I know we're talking a lot about inches right now, and a lot of folks don't care about inches, but it's also just a way to talk about it, and that's what my thought process is. It's just a way to talk about it, to say that's a big deer that I'm looking for, and I want to reference people back to your Instagram page to some of these things we'll talk about, because you've got really good graphics on there to show some of these exact things. But
one thing I want to add there, Clint, we've got states all over the West that have mule deer, and there's a lot of people that they didn't never score anything, and that's perfectly fine. And what I try and tell people is, listen, there's some states in the West, no matter whether you're hunting whitetail, coos deer, mule deer, elk, there's some of those times when maybe you wait 20, 25 years to draw some of these premium tags, or let's say you save up for 5, 6, 7 years and you buy a tag on a private piece of property, and you want to try and maximize your opportunity, and the old just if it looks good, shoot it. And sometimes when you've really sacrificed, when you've really waited a long period of time, you want to be able to go into the field kind of armed with an eye, or at least some data points to try and utilize or take advantage of the opportunity. And so I get in a conversation quite a bit with guys on my Instagram saying, just shoot it, don't worry about inches. And I totally understand that. But where I come from, I try and give guys, like I said, info and data points to try and make a good decision. Because the last thing you want is, someone applying for one of these tags and drawing, and it's taken them, 18, 20 years. And they get out in the field and they're done on the first day because they didn't take their time. They didn't know what they were looking for. So I try and always preface everything I say in regards to field judging as, I do it because I want to be accurate. I do it because I want to in no way downgrade the animal. If anything, it's the opposite. It's trying to see the quality and characteristics of a certain animal, and why that animal is bigger, better, more mature, different than the others. And quite honestly, we have to, as hunters, have to have some sort of benchmark system. We don't have to, but it's important if we're talking, deer, whether it be age class or whether it be size, that we kind of all have a general idea. And so, Boone and Crockett, SCI, Pope and Young, the different measuring systems, I think it's important to be able to historically categorize these bucks, and there's bucks that need to be recognized for, the amazing animals that they are. So just wanted to kick that in there.
Well said. Very much so. Just to start off with a nice, easy, fun, light question, what characteristics does your dream mule deer have?
I like those bucks that are real boxy and square, as wide as they are tall and big, deep forks. Obviously, I think everybody likes trash, extra points coming off. But, to me, there's nothing like a big, boxy, big eye guard, big square mule deer frame. When they turn and look at you, they're just outside their ears, and they're 17, 18, 19 tall, and just a big boxy buck. I like bucks personally that have a lot of mass, that are heavy, and they carry their mass throughout the whole configuration. So that's kind of what I look for when a buck turns and looks at you at a long distance. Even without your binos, you can tell it's a big boxy buck. That's to me kind of what I dream about when I think of big mule deer.
Huh. That's a great answer. I think a lot of people would say, I want a wide one. And I like
Yeah,
you.
I mean,
I'm going to ask about that later for sure.
Sure.
But width or its height or the mass or something like that. So I think that's what draws us Western hunters to mule deer is that just big frame, that beautiful frame. And you get certain characteristics in whitetail that are very attractive, but
I mean, even like big whitetails, I mean, just a heavy framed big whitetail that's high and tall, wide. I mean, I think we all could see pictures, we could flash them across the screen and be like, yep, that's what we're looking for.
yep.
Width is always one of those things. We can talk about that later, but width is always one of those things with mule deer. Out west, a lot of guys are, wanting that 30-inch wide mule deer and such. But the interesting thing is spread is the least. When you're talking percentage of score, it's only 12% of a mule deer score. So, for years, width has always been the thing that's talked about with mule deer, but the reality is it's the least out of the four scoring percentages, or categories, excuse me. It's the least at 12% of total score. So, we can get into, point length, main beams, mass, and then spread. But yeah, big and boxy is what I like.
That's awesome. So, and like myself going into this hunt, I just burned 3 points on this. I'm a resident, so that changes as non-residents, but burned 3 points. And in South Dakota, a 3-point unit is a pretty good one. We have our trophy ones, but even those are probably similar class. I think some of our bigger deer have come out of this unit from just word of mouth, what I've heard. But again, I'm probably just looking for a mature deer, and I think that's a common phrase among most folks is just looking for something mature. And when you have a mature deer on the ground, I got one in Colorado last year, just going up to that body of a mule deer and seeing, holy smokes, this is a horse. Just seeing I remember getting like 30 pounds of meat off of the deer without even touching the quarters. And it's like just a lot of meat on these things. And so what I want to ask is just before we talk inches and things, what are some of those couple of things, the first things you're looking at when trying to pick out a mature deer?
So I think you look at the mass. Mass should jump out at you either with your naked eye or with your binos. You want to see a buck that's heavy. Typically, mature deer are heavy deer, heavier. If you see light, pencilly racked, not a lot of mass. Normally, that's indicative of a deer that's a young deer. So you want to look for the mass, heavy at the base, carrying the mass throughout. That's usually a sign. And then, a lot of times the bigger deer will be a heavier, a darker antlered, like heavy horn buck. That's what you want to look for. But, you take those ears, and depending on where you're at, it can be anywhere from 18 to 20 to 20 to 22 inches on the tip to tip of the ears. You want to have those bucks that are out to their ears and then tall. So a mature or immature buck a lot of times will be kind of a skinny, pencily, kind of thin-horned buck, and they'll be inside of their ears. When they start getting outside of their ears and they start getting nice and tall, like I said, that 17 inch G2 to 20-inch G2, that's where you're starting to get a mature buck. You also, for maturity, if you're looking at aging, you want to get those, the pot belly. Look for a pot belly, look for a swayed back, look for kind of a sunk in hips, big shoulders. Similar to a whitetail, you want to have a blocky chested, pot bellied, kind of as those mule deer get older, they get a swayed back, just like a horse. I mean, you see a young horse and they don't have much sway in their back. As those mule deer get up in that, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9-year-old range, as they get older, they get a bigger chest, they get a swayed back, they get a pot belly, they get, a real gray face, they get a blocky head. That's what you want to look for when you're looking for maturity. When you see a little skinny face that almost looks like a doe, and you're trying to look at it and you're looking at the mule deer's rack and you look at its face, you can tell if it's young. The distance between the nose, the eyes, the blocky nose, you can tell if they're young.
And difference between, say, a whitetail and a mule deer, that face length, is there some things to consider there when jumping to a different species?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the mule deer are going to have a longer, from the tip of their nose, say, to their eye socket or to the burr of the antler. Mule deer in general are just a lot more lanky, a lot longer. You know, they're going to probably stand taller. Now, you're also talking to a guy that I'm down here in the Southwest where we only have Coues deer. So, I've only shot one eastern whitetail in my life, and I've been to Kansas once. So my experience level with whitetails, which is, probably the number one game animal in the United States, is very, very limited. But mule deer are going to be a lot more long and lanky compared to, your blocky whitetails there in the Midwest.
Yeah. Is the, when you see that Roman nose, is that an indicator of anything, or is that a genetic thing?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you get those big blocky noses, big blocky faces. And, it's one of those things, you have a young deer and a mature deer, and the more that you see next to each other, the more you can kind of start to differentiate, a mature deer versus a young deer, no different than a whitetail. But yeah, you get those big ears, on the Arizona Strip up here in northern Arizona. We have some deer that are, 26 ear to ear, 25, 26 inches tip to tip, where, in other parts of Arizona, you might have a desert deer that the tip to tip, they're only 22. So every place that you go, you got to kind of watch your anatomical characteristics, because they can change. And you don't want to go into a hunt with, using 22 as your tip to tip ear width, and you're up on the Arizona Strip where a big deer is going to be, pushing 26 inches tip to tip. You can really underestimate and misjudge deer based on that. But a Roman nose is a characteristic of a mature deer, both in whitetail and in a mule deer. A lot of times the more mature deer will have scarred ears. They'll have, clips in their ears. And, a lot of times at the bases, at their burrs where the antler comes out of the head, you're going to have, a lot bigger around. You're going to have little points and little kickers and stuff, the heavier and more mature those bucks get. Because as bucks mature, they get to a point where, they maximize their antlers, and then they start actually sliding and regressing and going down. And it seems like then they start palmating out, getting more mass, getting more little kickers and stuff around their burrs. And so when you're looking for maturity, you definitely want to watch those body characteristics and anatomical features, but you want to look for mass, and coming right out of the head, big bases usually indicate a mature deer.
Okay. I was just trying to look it up. I learned a new term the other day, and I gotta say it a dozen times before I remember. I'll have to dig into it, but it's those all the burrs and things around the base and the little extra things that don't score. Those all had a name, and I can't remember what that was. I'll have to look that up.
I mean, like kicker points or devil
No,
points
no,
or stickers. It
yeah,
actually has a.
yeah, it had a name. And I wonder if that was the National Deer Association that they just did a little video on it, and I thought that was the coolest thing. I think I saved it in my Instagram. I'm going to find that, but
Cool.
it just had that other little name. Like, oh, I had no idea that's what those are called. I'll find it and then I'll share it.
Yeah, send it to me.
So I'm sure you book quite a few hunters that are. This is their first mule deer hunt, or it's a bucket list thing. I'm going to go get a mule deer there, like you said. Most likely have hunted whitetails nonstop because that's what most of the country is for big game, and so you get those whitetail hunters in. What's your elevator speech to those guys to let's wait for a mature one, because the difference between a 170 whitetail that's a little bit more tight versus a 170 mule deer, which is a little taller, longer, and I'm sure whitetail hunters, and I've been with them where they want to get a little trigger happy, but trying to get the
it depends where we're hunting, and the quality of bucks that we have. I just try and tell anyone that I'm hunting with, whether we're elk hunting or deer hunting or what, let's really analyze. Let's try and take our time. We use optics mounted on a tripod, binoculars on a tripod, spotting scopes on a tripod, and I try and tell people nothing's going to happen fast. We're going to analyze. We're going to err on the side of trying to make sure that we've really been diligent and looked at the buck really hard before we make a decision, because we've all done things and made rash decisions where you jump into action and then realize whatever your excitement level was that the buck isn't what you thought it was. So anytime, and I give this advice to people that come and hunt with me. I give it to, young hunters. I give it to other guides. I give it to guys that guide for me, is try and take your time, try and analyze, try and calm yourself, try and really look for weaknesses, look for strengths. But a lot of times I'm looking at a rack trying to figure out, okay, is this everything we think it is? Is he missing anything? Are there any broken points? Is he missing a fork? Because those things can, you get up there and it's a big bodied deer and you shot it, it's going to go up over a hill and you shot it and you get up there and it's a big 3x4 or something. You don't want to have those situations where you've made a quick decision, and usually quick decisions don't work out well. So I tell people, like, if you're not 100% sure, don't shoot. If you're not 100% sure, let them go. We can try and get back on them. I would rather let a deer go than make a quick decision and get up and have something not be what the hunter wanted. So, I'm always preaching to my guides that work for me, try and spend as much time analyzing the deer, looking at it from every angle, trying to really interpret in your brain what you're looking at. And a lot of times it's great to have multiple people looking at a deer. If we have time and the deer's out at a distance, and I can, if I'm just on this deer and I think it's really special, but I really want to make sure, maybe I'll call someone over and say, hey, come take a look at this buck, or I let him go this morning and we're going to go out, come with me. Just you tell me if you think he's, what we should shoot. A lot of times with my hunting partners, we'll do that. We'll find a big deer, whether it be a coos or a mule deer, and then we, relocate the deer and just try and make a good decision.
Awesome. I had another thought about picking on a mature one. I take some new hunters out frequently, and the other day I got just as excited because we're doe hunting. get just excited shooting a old, just grandma of a doe. I got so excited. I went up to it and saw the in the Black Hills area there. It's almost like a subspecies. It's not, but they're so much smaller in the Black Hills of South Dakota than out in the prairie. And like their antlers don't get big. 140-inch deer in the whitetail in the hills is a monster. That's a really good deer. And one in the prairie that's a good deer. But man, that those teeth were worn out, and we got up to it, and the body was thick, just this wide body. Her face was long, and it was just one of those cool things that my hunter was kind of feeding off of the excitement. I was just as excited about getting a big doe as a big buck for some reason. Just like, man, we tricked her, and we know she's been hunted year and year after year, and evaded many hunters. So it was an exciting thing to see a big mature doe even.
Yeah, and I mean that's what we strive for as hunters. I think the more mature you get as a hunter, the more you want to be able to just let the young stuff live, and try and harvest the absolute most mature animals that we can, so that the young deer can, elk, deer, sheep, whatever, so that they can continue to have offspring and mate and create more animals out there. So I think the more, when you first start hunting, I think you just want to get an animal, and that's great too. Right. But I think the more you hunt, the more you want to hunt for those older does, those older bucks, those more mature animals, because the more mature animal that you harvest, the more chance that they're kind of on the end cycle of their breeding, and that they've done their job to create animals for us to enjoy and for us to eat. And so I encourage everyone out there to try and get where you're harvesting as mature of animal as you possibly can.
Yeah. So let's say we're in an area with 140 to 180 inch deer. It's not a big deer area, but it's got that potential for that 180. Which always seems like a benchmark. 180 is a benchmark, 200 is a benchmark, that 30-inch wide is a benchmark. Is there a distance from those animals that you want to get to in order to make it a solid decision? And the reason why I say 140 to 180 versus like at 180 to 200 is when you see a giant deer, there's just something in our brain that triggers, that's the deer. You just can tell
jumps out at you.
There's something big about that, and about the mass and the boxy frame. But is there a distance that you really want to get to before making a solid decision, or what's the transfer that?
I think the closer you can get, the better. I do think sometimes when you get too close to them, say inside 100 yards, I've had it really fool me, where I'm used to looking at these deer at 5, 6, 7, 800 yards, and then all of a sudden they get close, and I've even had big deer that I get 30, 40 yards from, and it seems like when they get up close, they actually don't look as big. Kind of to answer your question in a way is, I kind of like to look at these deer at 4, 5, 6, 700 yards, where I can be on either my 12s or my 15s on a spot, on a tripod, really look at them, and then put my spotting scope on them. But I think it comes down to, like, the more deer you look at, the better your eye gets at kind of differentiating what you're looking at. So if I had to choose, would I love to be 200-300 yards away with my real high powered optics and really be able to look at them? Sure, but that's not always going to happen. So any that 6, 7, 800 yards with my spotting scope, I can usually kind of categorize those deer, and you're talking 140 to 180 inch deer. I kind of anything like under 170, I kind of just say, it's a 150 class, 160 class, 170 class, 180 class. And then from 180 up, then I become more like, it's like a 185, it's like a 190, it's like a 195. So kind of anything under 180, I just kind of throw it into a 160 class, 170 class, etc. And then once they get over 180, 190, 200, over 200, that's when I really start kind of analyzing. So people that hunt with me, they're like, well, you're not even scoring that deer. I'm like, well, I'm not spending my time scoring that deer because I'm looking for something that's 190, 200 plus. So I'm just going to say we saw a nice deer, 160 class deer, let's keep looking. I know that doesn't help people when they're trying to score deer from 140, 150, 160, 170. It kind of just goes to show that the deer that we're looking at out here in the West, until they get around 180 inches, I just kind of say, it's a deer under 180. Well, how big? Well, it's a 165-ish. It's just a buck. Whereas, you would be looking at whitetails, and you might have, if you're in a great whitetail state, you might not even really care or like really analyze a deer until they get to 160. They're everybody has a different benchmark. I mean, my buddies that guide up on the Arizona Strip, I mean, they don't even really get into it until it's a 200 or better. Or
Wow.
you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So it's kind of like
Yeah.
where you're from and what you're used to looking at. But I kind of have a chart for like 190-inch deer and what you want to look for, and we can go over that and compare. And it's kind of like, okay, for 190, this is what you want, and then anything over that you can start adding on top of that. So 190 is kind of like my mark of like where I really start getting analytical and trying to break a deer down.
Well, that's the perfect segue. I was going to go into that. We're in a 180 to 200 inch area. Let's break that down. Except 190, focusing on that. What are you looking for that good buck?
So I have a chart here, and if anybody wants to send me a message, I can kind of send them the notes that I have. But for a 190 buck, you need G1s, which is your first point at about 2 3/4 inches, a G2 that's 17 inches, a G3 that's 10, and a G4 that's 10 inches. That's for point length. That's generally what you're looking at for a 190-inch buck, and you're going to have basically 20 inches of mass per side. You get 4 circumference measurements, and per those 4, you figure around 5 inches, so around 20 inches per side. Before we really get into that, I want to break down. So when you score a mule deer, in my opinion, it's not only my opinion, but it's actually a statistical fact. The 2 most important things for scoring a mule deer are point length and main beam. Point length actually makes up 44% of a mule deer score, and the main beam makes up 26%. The mass is 18, and the spread is only 12%. We talked earlier about people, the mule deer is kind of the iconic animal of the Western U.S. and people always talk about spread, but inside spread credit. So we're not talking about outside if he's got cheaters. Everyone talks about the outside spread. The inside, from the inside of the main beam to the inside of the main beam, only makes up 12% of your total score. Those inside spread, of a big deer, 190 inches or better, ironically, is a lot of times only like 20, 21, 22 inches, where people, they talk 30, 32, 33. That's outside. And granted, you can have spread of a mule deer be, 25, 26, 27, even 30 inches. But a lot of these big boxy bucks are like right inside their ears. They're that 21, 22 inches inside. But point length, so your forks are super important. And when I'm judging a mule deer with 44% of your total score being point length, I want to make sure that all of the points are as long as possible. And I use the deer ear, the mule deer's ear, from the tip to basically the corner part of the bottom part of the ear is, depending on geographic region, is 8 to 8 1/4. So that the mule deer's ear is a great thing to be able to take that ear and measure it against those forks. So look at the deer's ear from the tip to the corner, 8 1/4, 8 to 8 1/4. You have to have those forks. So your G2, your G3, your G4, those forks have to be at least as long, if not longer, than the deer's ear, or else you don't have a 180-inch deer in most cases. So you've got deer that maybe don't have eye guards. That can create a problem too. But the front forks of a mule deer, so points of a deer are the number, it's 44% of score. So you want to have big front forks, and then your G2, G3 split. Obviously you want big, but the front forks are the beam, and the G4 is the most important part of the 44%.
Got it.
You want to have big forks. And so to have a 190-inch deer with point length, what I look for is G1s that are 2 3/4 long, G2s that are 17, G3 that's 10, and G4 that's 10. And 10-inch forks means that you're able to put that deer's ear in that fork, and they're still, an inch or two on top of the ear. So when the deer's moving its head around, you start looking at their ear and go, can I put that ear in that fork and still have more distance there? And if you do, that's what really indicates a big deer. You get crabby front forks.
I need a visual aid.
Yep, you get forks in the front that are crabby, that can be a problem. You get forks in the back that are crabby, that can be a problem. You want to have those forks be bigger and deeper than the mule deer's ear.
So, I mean, this is not a big deer at all. It's just a nice shed.
Yep.
And so he's missing some depth right there. I mean,
correct.
For sure.
So I'm going to say that those forks are probably 7 inches, if I had to guess, 6.5, 7 inches. You want to be able to match a mule deer's ear up and make those ears. You want those forks deeper than the ears.
Yeah, 7 1/4 is that?
Yeah.
Well, actually, because a G2 would be there to there. So, I mean, that one's right at 8 inches or so.
Okay, so the deer's ear, if you had that on a mounted, like on a shoulder mount, you would be able to take the ear and be able to go, can I fit that ear in that distance? My guess would be the ear would be just a little bit longer than that fork.
Right. Okay. So, and on this deer, I mean, his G4s here are a lot better than his G3s. Are you trying to find is any one of those?
Well, so look at your G2 over here. Put your hand on the G2 so people know what the G2 is. So it comes from I'm pointing, but you can't see. It comes from the base of the antler up to the top. Okay. You want that on a 190-inch deer. You want that to be at least 17 inches. Okay.
Yeah, we're looking at 13.
Okay, but
just nice shit.
And then if that is 17, then you have your G3 that forks off of that. Okay, you want to have that at least over 8 inches. We're talking 180-inch deer, over 8 inches, and then. Why I say the front forks are most important is because it also encompasses the main beam. So point out at the tip of the main beam right there, out at the tip. So the length of your main beams make up 26%. It's the second most important characteristic of a mule deer score. So if you have stubby main beams, that also is probably going to mean your G4s are going to be stubby. If you have a main beam that extended out, say like out by the end of your ruler where your finger is right now, let's say that those main beams extended out another 7-8 inches. Most of the time that G4 is going to proportionately match out.
Oh,
does that make sense?
Yep.
So that's why those front forks are very important. If you see stubby front forks, that typically means you have short main beams, which is 26, the second most important aspect of your score. So when you have a stubby looking main beam, that should throw off a red flag that potentially your G4s are going to be small also. When you have a big, long, wrapping main beam that comes way around in the front or goes way out, a lot of times those G4s will proportionately match the length of that main beam, which is adding inches and adding length. So, the back forks and the front forks, the point length, that's number one. Then you have your main beams. With main beams, you want them to go out, away from the head, and then start wrapping around and coming around in the front, just like a whitetail. If a whitetail just comes out like this, the beams aren't as long. But if they go wide, then they start wrapping around in the front, and then they come close together. That's a lot more circle, if you will, and a lot longer distance. But point length and main beam, you're talking 44% and 26%. And then you get 4 circumference measurements. And that's, if you want to show the people, it's between the burr and the eye guard. That's the first circumference. The second circumference is between the eye guard and where the G2 main beam split. The next circumference measurement is at the base of the G2 right there. And then between the G2 and the G4. And that makes up 18% of your scoring percentage. So as we go from 44% to 26% of the main beams, then 18 is mass, and then 12 is your inside spread.
So I think he answered my question on the main beams. I was going to ask next is, that's such a hard thing to measure because you've got such a curvy thing going on, but you're really using these tines to figure the
if you take
ratio
your
of that
8 to 8.25 ear, and so hold that rack up kind of by your head where I can kind of see it as if it was on your head. Yep, hold it up. Okay, what you do is you take the 8 to 8.25 ear and you go, okay, it's sticking out right here. So you measure it from the base up by where like the G2, and then try and figure another ear and another ear. So if you can get 3 ears, so 3 times 8, you have a 24-inch main beam. So try and kind of put 3 ear lengths into a main beam. 24 inches is about where you want to be on, let's say, 180 to 180 class or better is a 24. So pretty easily you can kind of superimpose that 8-inch ear into those beams to get around that 24, 25-inch main beam length.
That's fascinating. Yep. It's interesting to break the numbers down on that. To see the percentages of that 44% main, or the points, and 26 main beam, and mass being so, I mean, important, but still not as important as that main beam.
Yeah, exactly. And then the most important thing and tip I can give people is get as many antlers in your hand as you can and measure them. And you will get to where your eye can spot, 17-inch G2s. It can spot, 9+ inch forks. It can spot a 25-inch main beam. If you score quite a few antlers, go to a taxidermist shop and say, can I just sit and just run a tape? Can I look at it? And I mean, still to this day, I'll write down on a piece of paper, I'll look at a deer's antler just like that, and I'll try and guess the score, and then I'll go and measure it. And there's nothing that takes the place of looking writing down the measurement and then actually measuring it, seeing where you might have missed it, and do it on, 20, 30, 40 antlers. Go to another shop and say, hey, can I measure some of your antlers? I just want to, sharpen my eye on field judging.
Yeah. So I'm thinking for my hunt, based on the area that I know what it's going to hold, is that helps me know I really want about 2.5 ear lengths. Would be a deer I'm going to shoot, because that's going to get me a buck just a little smaller than this. This would be great. I would love to shoot a buck on this hunt about this size. And then look for something that is got just those deep forks. I'm looking at one of my last Colorado bucks. It's just, he doesn't have that. He does not score worth the darn that, but it was a cool hunt, and a darn coyote ran the 180, 90, 200 incher off. So he was the one hanging out. So he just, I mean, that is.
Yeah. So it's a really good example. It's a great deer. You shot it and you should be tickled with it. And it is what it is. But when you're just looking at a deer, trying to compare it to another deer, that's all we're doing. We're not saying one animal is better than the other. What we're saying is we're just looking at the antlers, saying which antlers are better. This is a great example to look at. When you look at the forks here, you see that the back forks, the G2 and the G3, okay, you see that those forks are only a couple of inches. If we're trying to say what makes this deer what it is compared to a 180-inch deer, just go ahead and add, 9-inch forks on all of these points, and that's what you're starting to look for. And you've got your main beams here. One thing on main beam length, you can either use this rack or the shed. If I had antler here with me, I would do it. But when you're looking from the side, you want as much space between those points. So right there between the G4 and the G2, do you see that distance right there? Put your finger right there on the main beam between the put it on the main beam, touch the main beam. You want that distance between the G2 where it goes up and the G4. You want as much distance as possible, as well as coming out of the head. And like on that shed, you want the distance from the burr. Well, that's a great example right there. Look at the distance between the G4 and the G2. On this shed, it's actually a longer distance between those two. And if you were to get a 180-inch or 90 or 200-inch, do you see between the G2 and the G4 on the beam, it would be another, 4 or 5 inches longer.
Yeah.
So spacing between points is a good indication of a longer main beam. The shorter and more compact and tight that the G4 is to the G2, that means a shorter main beam. So as a deer gets a bigger main beam, there's going to be a bigger distance between the eye guard and the G2 than the G2 and the G4. And then from the G4 out to the tip of the beam, see how this deer on the shed, see how much longer the beam is from the G4 out. Do you see how it's another 2.5, 3 inches long?
Yep.
So that's, and then if you, let's say, that's actually a great thing to look at right there. If you had, let's say, a neck size up deer, bigger than the shed, you would notice that everything is proportionately a little bit longer. And now the main beam is going to tip out another 2-3 inches. That distance between the G4 and the tip of the beam is going to be longer. The distance between the G4 and the G2 on the beam is going to be another 3 or 4 inches longer. Everything just starts, growing outward.
Yeah. Huh. Just for sake of conversation, in the next room, I got a little better one that I think would be worth the conversation.
Yeah.
And it's probably going to throw a little change in the conversation as well, because it's got some interesting character to it. And so these were some sheds I found. Jeez. First off, I found the biggest side first, and then and yeah, this side where he's got weeny little guys back here, but yet he's got this whole giant thing there.
Yeah, he's got a full inline with a fork. One couple things I want to point out with that deer. Turn it a little bit where it's more where I can see it more head on. Okay, see where you're holding that deer between the burr and the eye guard?
Yep.
Do you see how much distance there is from the burr to where the eye guard starts?
Yeah.
That's a big difference between those other two deer. In other words, there's a lot more space between that burr and that eye guard than those other two deer.
Yeah, my four fingers are barely
yes.
there.
And then proportionately go between the eye guard and where the G2 splits. Do you see how that proportionally there's a lot more distance there?
Mm-hmm.
And then as you wrap around the beam, look at the distance between the G2 and the G4. You can fit your whole hand in there.
Yeah.
Now, as you get out in front of the G4 on this other typical side, notice how you could almost get like 2 or 3 hand wraps around, which is a lot more space. You see that?
Yeah.
So that's kind of a good indication of a deer. You know, I would bet that that deer's beams are, you know, in that 24-inch range. I would bet those eye guards are pushing, 3 inches. You know, his G2 splits, the forks are not deep, but you notice over on his left side, like that, back where you were on that right side on that G2, that G2 normally would match the length of the G3. So what I would say right there is that G2 is a little weak, but he's got a great G3. Over on this right side that you're looking at, he has a great G4. I would bet that G4 is probably, 9-10 inches, maybe more.
It's over 12.
Okay, so so if the deer ear was here, you would be able to kind of superimpose that ear and you'd be like, holy smokes, there's like 3.5 inches more than the deer's ear. You go over to this more non-typical side, he's got a whole inline, so his G4 out here is not as long as the G4 on the other side, but he's got a whole inline with a fork. Okay. And that alone is probably 12 inches at least.
Yep.
And then his fork is 4 inches. So you're looking at 16 inches of extra point. So that's another thing that I want to point out. With point length being 44% of your score, the more points you can get on a deer's antler, the better. So you've got your typical 4x4 antler configuration, but you start adding inlines like this buck has, where it's got an inline and a fork, you're looking at 12, 13 inches of inline plus the fork is another, 3 inches. You're looking at 15, 16 inches of extra point here on this deer. Yeah. Make sense?
Yeah. And it's been years since I measured this buck, and I didn't write it on the back of the skull there, but I want to say it was lower 190s.
I was going to say 190 to my eye. It looks like 190-inch deer. Now hold that shed up, not the other antlers, but hold the shed up kind of like that. On the other side. Now look at the difference. Look at the difference of the mass between those two deer. I would estimate that deer, that the full skull, I would bet that deer's probably a 6-7-year-old deer. I would bet that shed is probably a 3-4-year-old shed. Look at the mass difference. Look at the distance between the point difference. Look how much longer the main beam is. That's just a function of age and maturity. Yeah. Look at how around the burrs and bases, there's all those, little points and it gets nubby and knobby. That's an indication of age. Where look at the shed and look how smooth it is around the shed.
Yep.
You see that the shed antler doesn't have those knots and those gnarls. It's more of a smooth. When you start getting those little bumps, that's a sign of maturity.
Yeah. And we're gonna find out what those are called again when I looked that up. And when I found these, my buddy was like, "No way, that's all that scores." But when you look at it, like I think this is the first side I found, and I saw, God, look at that beam, and it took me another week to find the other side. But the beam on this is so much longer on this side than it is over here. This is his weak side, but it just didn't have the beam length over here, and then he just didn't have the tine length to match that side over there. So he was on the verge of, like, if he shared some characteristics on both sides, to be a giant, an absolute giant.
Keep holding that up, and I want to talk about a couple anatomical characteristics and how you can use them. We've talked about ears, being that 8 to 8.25. Ear width, when a deer is kind of alert and looking at you, generally you can use that 22 inches to 24 inches across the west, and that's a pretty good indication of width. So when those deer ears are sticking out tip to tip, you're 22 to 24. But another thing that I like to use is the top of a deer's back to the bottom of their belly, depending on maturity. Now, a mature deer in our area that's, say, 170, 180 class is going to have like a 19-inch from the top of back to bottom of belly, that distance when you're looking at them standing broadside. Where that becomes important to use is here on your G2s. So trying to judge the length of your G2s, you start trying to, and this is an abnormally short G2 for a buck of this caliber, but let's say that it came up and matched its G3. You want that 17-inch number. So you take a deer, he turns and looks at you, he's standing broadside. You can measure from the top of their back to the bottom of their belly, and can you put that distance right there in that G2 to measure? I'm going to say if he matched there, you're probably looking at 16 and a half right there, almost 17.
Where my thumb is 17. So
okay,
he would have matched there.
And so on that 180, 190 plus inch deer, you want those 17-inch twos. So you take the top of their back to the bottom of their belly and you say, can I put that distance and measure their length? Can I put that distance and have it be their G2s? If it's shorter than that, then you probably are looking at, 15, 16 inch G2s. If you're like, I can put the distance from the top of the back to the bottom of the belly in there, that puts you looking at, 17, 18 inch G2s, and that's where you want to be.
Yeah. I mean, he's missing 5 inches right here. Right. 5 inches there, and
take the G3 on the other side where he's really crabby on this side. His fork, yes, he has an inline, but look at his G3 there. It's probably only, 2.5 inches.
Yeah.
For a buck of that caliber, normally he put all his energy in that inline, but normally that same buck, if he didn't have that inline, he would have, probably 8 inches, 9 inches of a G3 there, but his configuration put all of his energy into that inline.
If you were looking for a higher scoring buck, what would you rather have? Would you rather have a giant inline or a deep fork?
Well, I love extra points. I love abnormal points. I love anything so I love this buck you have in your hand. So, I would prefer this buck over just a standard 4x4. I have a bunch of those. Anything that's cool like this that has an inline with a fork, I mean, that's just killer. Yeah. I love a deer like this. I love a deer like this that has big knobby eye guards, and you can see that they've got a little curl to them. That to me is a sign of maturity. Big bases, big, gnarly, heavy eye guards with, bladed. That's a sign of a mature deer.
Yeah. Well, cool. And as we got a buck here with a little bit of mass, is there, besides just looking at a deer and say he's got some mass to him, is there a measurement you're using to?
A lot of guys use the eye socket. 2 to 2.5 inches. The eye socket when you're measuring it. But it's for me, it's not it's just something I look at. But I try and envision just how you had your hands wrapped around. Can I wrap my hands around it? Is it something that easily I could wrap around, or would I have a hard time getting my hands around the bases? That's kind of and I score enough antler that it's kind of over time I've been able to recognize a big based heavy deer.
Yeah.
We want those deer to have 20 inches of mass, so you get 4 circumference measurements per side, 5-inch wraps. 5 inches is kind of what we shoot for. I would think that deer that you had in your hands has 19 to 20 inch would be my guess. Circumference, 19 per side, maybe 20 per side. And then where we are, we want that and bigger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. And back to bucks with a little character and if we're looking for hitting one of those benchmarks score wise, how beneficial are the extras, the little kickers and those things is because you can still get
gross score. Yeah, go ahead.
I want to reference a picture you just posted. It might be a few weeks old now, but you had a littler buck there with extras, and then you had a mature buck. I can't remember if that one had extras as well, but we can get distracted. And if we see a buck and we love him and he's sweet and cool looking, we're going to be happy with him. But if he's still a little immature yet, but he's carrying some of that cool growth on him, how beneficial is some of that versus just a big frame?
Well,
like, if you were to put a percentage,
it's hard to put a percentage on it, but extras can add up quick. I mean, you start getting 2 inches here, 2 inches here, 3-inch kicker here. All of a sudden, you're 8, 9, 10, 12 inches of extra on your frame. So, you have 170-inch frame deer and have 20 inches of extra. They're at 190 inches. Remember, point length is the number one percentage-wise most important thing for a high-scoring mule deer. So the more points you can have, the better. The more extras you can have, the better. The more inlines, the more kickers. The more extras, the bigger the deer. So you've got these big giant frame deer that are typical and no extras. Then you have big giant frames and you start throwing extras. I mean, some of our deer up on the Arizona Strip, I mean, they have 30, 40, 50, 60 inches of extra points. And, you start getting a 200-inch mainframe with 40 inches of extra, you're 240-inch deer. So obviously, the more points that you have per side, whether they're inline points, whether they're typical points or extras, add to the score. So the more extra points, the better. Now, I have the fortune of being able to manage properties where we're hunting private property, where we can let deer, using the example that you were using, young deer that have kickers, but we can tell he's a young deer. We try and let those deer go and grow to the next year, and all of a sudden we see them, they've added more kickers, the kickers have gotten longer, they've gotten heavier. So guys that are hunting public land, it's a little bit different because they just allot so many tags and you just have your tag and you go hunt. But when you have the fortune to be able to manage private properties where you can be like, this buck's got like 4 inches, 4 different kickers, 4 extra points, he only looks like a 3-4-year-old deer, let's let him go another year. And all of a sudden he blows up and he's got an inline, he's got a kicker off a kicker. He's that's where it gets exciting being a property manager, managing these properties, trying to grow these animals and letting them reach their absolute full and maximum potential. With extra points on elk, on coos deer, on mule deer, I don't have the experience on the whitetail, but they'll actually move kickers from one side. I've seen deer have kickers off G2s, G3s. Next year, they move the kickers to the other side. This side becomes a straight typical. I've seen them, have a drop tine on one side, and then the next year, the drop tine moves to the other side. So, that's the exciting thing about being able to watch a lot of deer, is watching these deer with extra points, how those extra points morph over a couple of seasons. Sometimes they'll be exactly the same. Sometimes all of a sudden that one inline now will have a kicker, and then it'll have a little dropper. And it's fun to watch these deer that are non-typical deer grow year after year and see what the non-typical points do, because most of the time you get a non-typical deer with extra points on each side. Every year that goes by, it starts just getting crazier and crazier. And I love a non-typical deer.
Yeah Who doesn't? And is there a feature on a set of antlers that is tricky, one that can be deceiving when you're looking at it?
Absolutely. I have a saying with sheep as well, but elk, deer, all the species of deer, mass hides length. You get a deer that's really heavy, a lot of times the forks will look short. And whether you're talking elk or whether you're talking deer, mule deer, you get a real heavy buck, mass hides length. So you get blocky, heavy, throughout the whole antlers, not even the scoreable point of the antlers. I mean, even on the actual points, heavy hides length, mass hides length. Same way with a bighorn sheep. When it's real heavy, sometimes they're a lot longer than you think because there's a lot of mass there, and it makes you think they're shorter and stubbier, but they're actually, because they have so much mass, it's just hiding that length. So you got to be careful with that. And guys are probably listening going, geez, if I saw something that heavy, I wouldn't worry about it. But when you have the fortune to have these properties where you can, these great tags across the West where you can really analyze deer, mass hides length. So don't be deceived if you've got a super heavy deer and you're like, that buck is so heavy. Do not be surprised if all of a sudden you get that deer on the ground and his forks are actually longer than what you think, because mass hides length every time. With elk, I mean, we get big bulls and they're super heavy and we're like, man, just points don't look that long. Well, of course we know that point length is the most important thing, so we're always looking at points. Well, yeah, he's so heavy his points look shorter because he's got so much mass.
That's a good point. I just had two sets of mule deer antlers. One was 214 and the other one was 220 or 219. And the 219 had 10-inch droppers on both sides and 36 inches on the outside. So it's inside because he had extras and junk, and they were only inches apart. And the other one was narrow, 22 inches wide, and just solid mass, just crazy mass to him. Mm-hmm. And you wouldn't think that those two scored so similarly, but that mass was just outstanding, and he was just a typical 4-point look, and that other one was so wide, and those would be two bucks standing side by side that you'd have a really hard time shooting that one with mass over the one with drop tine. I'd probably be shooting the drop tine one. He scored 5 inches bigger, but just the 10-inch drop tines on both sides, and the width is just drawing you right to it. But that mass was deceiving, very deceiving. I thought it was a 200-inch deer and ended up being 210 or 212, 14. Yeah. 214.
Mass hides length every time. Just remember, mass hides length.
That's a hard thing to field judge for me.
And the opposite of that is if it's a skinny, if you're like, ooh, that deer doesn't look like it has much mass, it deceivingly looks longer because it's skinny. Right. So you got to watch both sides. You got to watch your proportionate mass. If it's a skinny rack, those forks look bigger. When it's heavier, the forks look smaller. You got to watch mass on both sides. From a perception standpoint, mass can really mess you up. But remember, when you're trying to judge a deer, if you're going for as high a score as you can, point length is 44%, main beam is 26%. Those are the first two things that you should look at and say, how are his forks? How are his beams? Do they go Do they go out of his head? Do they go wide? And do they come around and wrap around, or do they tip up? Okay, I want long main beams. If they just come out and barely even come around, you're like, ooh, he's got short main beams. That's 26% of my score. I got to watch out to, be careful with this deer. He's got short main beams.
Huh. Yeah. And I got two more questions, probably shorter ones for you, so we wrap up. But is there a view, like if you got a deer in his bed and he's not giving you much, is there a certain view that you would rather have over the other? If you only got one
I want
view,
head on. I want head on. I want looking straight across, perpendicular, or even a little bit down, straight head on. I want to be able to look at the ear tip to ear tip. I want to be able to look at the box. The most important, same thing with the bighorn sheep. I want that head on look. I can judge an animal the best if I get a head on look. And then obviously if they turn a little bit like that, so I can really see their forks, that's important. Whereas like on an elk, I want the side view so I can really see the length of all the points. On an elk, I want a side view. A mule deer, I want head on so I can kind of judge the boxy frame. Then if they'll turn for me a little bit and I get to see the forks, the front forks and the bottom forks, that's what I want to see.
That makes a lot of sense. How does this translate to deer in velvet? And is that just to add a more deceiving factor because you seem like you've got the mass there, but it's not?
Right. And so velvet can be very deceiving. You have to be able to look at a lot of velvet deer, look at velvet deer that shed their through trail cams and stuff, be able to get a sense of how much mass that adds. And remember, mass hides length. So a lot of times when they're in velvet, you're looking at a velvet deer and you can't really decide on his forks because he's got, fuzzy, fuzz around it, and you can't really tell the forks. As soon as they rub, like our deer in Mexico, our deer just rub. Like you're like, what? Yeah, our deer don't rub till about October 15th. Between October 15th and October 30th is when our mule deer rub in Mexico. And so all of our trail camera pictures that we're just getting in are that transition between velvet and when they're shedding. And velvet, adds quite a bit of circumference to the antler. I want to see them rubbed, and that to see a buck rubbed, that's going to give me the best look that I can get.
Yeah. I'm on Odd Guy Out. I think I have no interest in velvet deer. I know there's a lot of people that they love the idea of velvet deer. A dark horned mule deer is the most attractive antler.
Yeah, they're
me.
Pretty sweet.
There's something that I want to see, that full growth. I want to see the shine. I want to see the color, and you got so much characteristics. So I've never shot a velvet anything.
I like them all. I like velvet and hard antlered. Yeah. So I kind of like them all.
Yeah, I need to that'll maybe be something I attack down the road is trying to get something a little earlier. But it's hard to pull away from the elk woods during that time. I want to be elk hunting while those mule deer in this country anyway are in velvet and the season's open. Well, Jay, I appreciate this very much. This is a great episode for some of those folks who might be drawing some of those really good tags, or I know some of my beginner hunter listeners, it might not be for them, but this was a good mix. I don't get a lot of these higher end thinking of looking at a deer in this way. A lot of folks, I'm sure, are just wanting to go fill a tag, and it's great, and that's sure. a good
Absolutely.
thing. But I appreciate it very much. I learned a lot, and now I'm really excited. I mean, November's my favorite month. It's my birthday month. It's my November rut month. It's the
rutcation is about to start, huh?
Absolutely, and. And work slows down for me and my wife, so that's the best month during the year for that to happen. So it's time to burn some vacation time and to get going. So if you wouldn't mind, again, if people are wanting to either look into the hunts you guys have, what's the website and the Instagram, social media? Where do they find that?
Pretty much J Scott Outdoors on Instagram, jscottoutdoors.com website. My podcast is J Scott Outdoors Western Hunting and Fishing Podcast. It's on iTunes. But yeah, come find me. Facebook, J Scott Outdoors. Instagram, J Scott Outdoors. You can send me an email, direct message. Love to help people. Appreciate you having me on, thinking of me, and it's always great in November to be talking mule deer, and so look forward to maybe coming on again and talking some of the other animals.
Yep.
Yeah, if anybody's got any questions, you just feel free to reach out. Come find me on Instagram, J Scott Outdoors. And Clint, I appreciate you thinking of me and having me on this morning.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm thinking that elk one's got to happen in July or August this
Perfect.
next
Sounds
year.
great.
So, all right. Thank you.